Content isn't everything. It's the only thing. Learn from the smartest minds in media as they discuss how businesses, brands, influencers, and media outlets are leveraging content to reach fans better than ever before. Presented by JAKK Media. All right, today on the Media Mindset, we're joined by an old friend of mine. We go back over a decade, and that's Johnny Bowman. He's the Chief Operating Officer at Edenworks. Johnny, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you, David. Jazzed to be here.
First question, pretty standard one to start off. How do you end up at a place like Edenworks?
So I was doing something completely different. I was doing organizing first through labor unions way back, and then was doing more of the digital side of organizing for unions, political people running for office. Then I started my own company and realized this was not the industry I wanted to be in. Working for campaigns is tough work, and also they don't pay you. But also I my real hobby on the side was blogging about manufacturing. I had this thesis on as energy gets cheaper in the United States, as automation goes up, it makes sense to do things in the United States that we haven't done in at least a good long while. Food manufacturing is actually the big one for me. And I met two of the co-founders of Edenworks at a conference for my own startup and immediately fell in love, knew this was what I wanted to do. And the guys, Jason and Ben, who I saw talk, just blew me away. They were the smartest guys in the room. And I knew like this is the lifetime opportunity that I'd been looking for. So harassed them for a solid couple months. I was at business school at the time as well, joined as soon as I graduated. And that was 4 years ago.
Time flies. I remember, I feel like I was going to say when I was typing up some of these questions, I was like, oh, when you joined Edenworks last year. And I was like, wait a minute, that was over 4 years ago.
Yeah, that was 2014.
5 years ago.
5 years ago, yeah.
Wow. And I think something that might be useful for folks who didn't read the episode description before listening to this is maybe just a quick elevator pitch on the space Edenworks plays in right now. Yeah.
Okay. So we are an indoor farm. We grow fish and salad greens. And the way we farm is called aquaponics. The fish waste actually fertilize the salad greens. And we grow inside a warehouse. And so it's completely LED lit in terms of how our plants grow. And it's a connected system so that there is basically an ecosystem, but underneath one roof.
Well, that's super cool. One thing that I was curious about in the context of that is, it sounds like your company clearly has a focus on reinvention and innovation. So how does that permeate the rest of the company and how your culture operates and all of that? Yeah,
so when you build a farm inside a warehouse, there's just opportunities to do something different every single step of the way. And the company just as the DIY mentality is certainly there. Everyone's way handier than I am. I can barely hit a nail without hurting myself deeply, but not the case for everyone else. And so we built this whole system ourselves. And when you do that, you learn things about biology, about chemistry, about physics that you otherwise wouldn't. And so we have our own system of not only a design that is competitive with fields in terms of cost, which is, to my knowledge, the first time in human history that we can do that, build a farm inside a closed space and have it be competitive with the field. But two, we're learning things about microbiology that really are being applied to farming for the first time in ways that are ancient, but in terms of being understood academically, in terms of being applied commercially, are really first times. And so there's that biological element combined with an automation, physics element, and our team is basically split. We've got farming staff who are innovating on the operations and how we grow. We have an R&D team on engineering that is constantly redesigning the system and optimizing for how do you move things through the system better, how do you make things more robust so they don't break. And then we've got a software and engineering team that is making sure that the data that we get from growing things, whether it's the ambient temperature, whether it's the water, and everything in between, we capture all of that, measure what we changed, make sure that we refine it so that the next iteration of plants grows bigger and better.
Very cool.
When you're talking about disrupting an industry, as massive as food. When I've heard people talking about this before, I've talked to people who do everything from, cricket farming to sustainable systems for aquaculture, a bit like what you all are doing. You hear people talk about having to change the consumer mindset, and whether it's alternative sources of protein or just where folks are getting their food from, the future of food seems to be this double question of, okay, how do we actually grow this food in a sustainable way? And how do we change the consumer mindset around what people can expect to eat, what they're excited to eat, and what they're excited to buy? I've seen you kind of at the forefront in your writing and in what you push out on social media, really trying to, it seems to be a component of your thinking and how you operate in this space. What is Edenworks doing, and are there any plans for future endeavors on that as far as creating content around sustainable indoor farming?
Yeah, so I think this is the biggest, hardest question for us as a company and for the entire food industry, especially for farms, because the only way that Edenworks has a chance of really making it is if people view their food in completely different ways than how they have in the last 50 years. And the way historically farms have been operating is you have two ways to get noticed. One is your package, the other is your price. That is it. You don't see radio ads for lettuce. You don't see even like the most famous ad I can think of for a farmed product would be Got Milk. And that is not a company. That was a California trade association for milk saying, all milk people get together, let's get more people to buy milk. And so you see trade associations and really like getting all the players together for ads. But for individual companies, it really is pushing a message about something big needs to change in order to get noticed. And we're beginning to see that first with organic, then with local. We're getting more and more into regenerative agriculture as something that the food industry is talking about. That's a huge thing that I believe deeply in. And getting people to notice these major changes usually means saying, by the way, what is happening right now is deeply, deeply flawed. And for us, so not only is, the industrialization of agriculture, which has gotten a lot of attention, not only is that a trend that we push back on deeply. We don't want one place in California producing all of the greens for the United States. That just seems like no one gets fresh greens as a result. But also, more and more recently, we're seeing a lot of things. We're seeing a lot of biological products getting replaced by processed ones. So I would say alternative meat is a prime example of this. It is the new hotness when it comes to supposedly healthy eating. And Beyond Meat, for example, just IPO'd. Everyone made a bunch of money. So there's a lot of money going into the space right now. But it's taking beef and replacing it with what my buddy Justin Mars from Kettle and Fire mentioned on Twitter just the other day. It's replacing it with a canola oil and pea protein smoothie, which is not healthy. When you take biological elements that are super complicated, like beef or chicken or whatever, and you replace them with chemicals, the human body doesn't digest those in the same way it has known to digest them for millennia. And we don't know what happens to the human body if it's surviving on that kind of diet. And so I see this major trend of processed foods getting a bigger and bigger foothold, and it's under the guise of either healthiness or more sustainable living. And a lot of that is true, but it's also sacrificing a deeply human and I would say nutritionally important aspect of our diet, which is biology, which is bacteria. And I am hopeful, and Edenworks is super hopeful that can regain its place in our diet and in our conversation. The bacteria, the biology of how we grow and what we put in our bodies, I think needs to be a major thing that the food industry talks about, that we as concerned consumers care about, that registered dietitians talk about. And I think it's just beginning over the last couple of years to do that, which has been really exciting.
Very cool. So what are the marketing challenges that you face around that, around, communicating about this new technology that you've developed and about the production of your food?
Yeah, so when it's tough. Again, we're a farm. We have a package that does 99% of our marketing, and all it says is ecologically grown. We don't say we're growing from aquaponics. We don't say we're the most sustainable farm, on the East Coast. There's very little marketing real estate that we have, and so we have an Instagram. Instagram is huge and great for us. We put most of our day-to-day efforts on that. Just because we grow beautiful product and we want people to see it. But in terms of telling our story, it's really through newspaper articles, earned media, podcasts. It is not something that we can just pay money and gain mind share with, because A, we don't have the money for that, and B, it's just not something people don't listen to those kinds of print advertisements or Facebook advertisements and then go and buy a different kind of lettuce. It is something that has to be felt deeply, and that requires a lot of education, and that just requires a movement that means conversations like these.
You mentioned some of the brands. You mentioned Kettle and Fire as a brand that you have a personal connection to. What are some other brands in the space that you either partner with at Edenworks or maybe want to partner with because you think your values around food are aligned?
It's a good question. I would say that removing biology from food products is a bad thing. But actually, Sir Kensington, which removed eggs from mayonnaise, I really like what they're doing. Like, I wouldn't say we should put eggs back in mayonnaise because that was not the healthiest thing to begin with. But they've been our CEO Jason has learned a lot from them, and I think we're really grateful for what they've done from a marketing standpoint and just how they've developed as a business and been very sober and just very true to themselves the whole time. In terms of other brands, I mostly look at, I would say, like a Dr. Bronner's for inspiration on that front. In terms of marketing and how we communicate ourselves, they're just a weird company. They have total gibberish, authentic though gibberish, on their package. And no one can understand it. No one's ever read the whole thing unless they've, really tried to write a piece about it or something. It's just a testament though to how much they really care about what they're doing. And those kinds of companies I think are very rare, but definitely what we want to emulate at Edenworks. We don't compromise when it comes to sustainability. We don't compromise when it comes to the quality of our food. We will do things that aren't commercially easy as a result. Growing fish and salad greens at the same time is an example of that. It's not easy, but we do it because it's the way to do it from a sustainability point, and a quality standpoint. I can't say though that there's a whole lot of companies out there that take that same mentality, that are willing to say like, yeah, we will do the really hard thing because 5-10 years from now, it's going to be the new standard. Usually the time frame is like a year or two from now.
When you're looking in those 5-year, 10-year, 20-year increments, what are you hopeful for in the future of food manufacturing, and what are you maybe a little pessimistic toward?
So hopeful for, I do think right now in ag, there's a super healthy conversation happening around regenerative agriculture. So it used to be organic. That was the gold standard. And in organic, it has had some huge successes, but it's not the end all be all for farming. It is basically a list of things that you cannot do. And as climate change gets more and more attention, and the attention it deserves, and is reckoned as the existential crisis that it is, we're realizing that agriculture has a role to play in that, because it's like 50% of all U.S. land, it's 9% of all U.S. greenhouse gases, and so what can we do to make sure that the food we eat just isn't food, but is actually helping the planet, not being extractive? And regenerative agriculture is a movement around that, coming up with that answer. I think thinking of food as a supportive element to Mother Earth is something that I'm really excited about. And it's really, I think, happening. It's been around, those movements have been around for quite some time, but in terms of the popular consciousness, only within the last year or two have I seen it gain, I think, the attention that it's starting to deserve. In terms of things that worry me, though, I do think that we have continually taken the biology out of food, and we've replaced it with chemicals, and that's going to be a very hard trend to reverse. Our fields are, when it comes to yields, you apply more chemical fertilizer. Well, then you get disease because you've applied too much fertilizer. Now you apply pesticides, and there's an entire, hundreds of billions of dollars economy that has gone into supporting that. You can't change that overnight, and it does take a whole lot of not only technological innovation, but government innovation and support to change that. And I'm pessimistic that kind of structural change from a government and from a consumer demand standpoint is going to happen anytime soon. I think it takes a real big crisis to even worse than the climate change crisis that we have right now, or the nutritional crisis I would say that we have right now, with life expectancy decreasing. I think it's gonna get worse before it gets better.
Well, to kind of add to that, so on a consumer side, what are some web platforms if people are interested in living a more sustainable lifestyle or making different choices about their diet that are more sustainable, more environmentally friendly? What are some web platforms or social media platforms that you might recommend that would have good tips, lifestyle choice advice, things like that?
Number one, Edenworks Instagram, obviously.
Is that just at Edenworks?
It's at Edenworks Grows.
At Edenworks Grows.
It's fire. We've got the best salad green pics every day. We got some fish. We've got some recipes. Highly recommend.
Whew.
Yeah, you can feel the heat.
Oh.
In terms of blogs, lifestyle, honestly, that's not my thing. I don't really look to the internet for wellness advice or nutritional advice. Mostly because I'm lazy, but also just talking to friends. I think when it comes to eating healthy, it's pretty simple. You want a balanced diet. You want a diversity of things so that your gut microbiome has different stuff to feed off of, and I try to do that and eat different stuff every day and make sure that I'm not a gross garbage can of a human being. But I don't really spend time thinking about what the newness out there is. I do think mostly in terms of these bigger kind of human catastrophes that I think are facing us, and so I do read a lot when it comes to the blogs and the websites around the industries that support this whole network. I think newfoodeconomy.com does a great job of reporting on the food industry. And if you want to learn how New York dairy farms are doing, it's hard to get that information anywhere, but they do a great job. Civil Eats is another good one, and they do combine. The United States government just banned this new chemical. Here's why you shouldn't put that in your body. They do cover that, but I'm not going it for the wellness advice I'm doing it because I'm mostly scared and angry.
What are some common misconceptions that people like Levi and myself, who might be relatively new to the space but want to learn more, what are some common misconceptions we might have about the food manufacturing industry right now? It could be kind of the large industrial food manufacturing complex, or it could be misconceptions about younger companies like Edenworks, people like yourself who are trying to make actionable change in that industry.
Yeah, so food manufacturing is the least sexy industry in the world, which is saying something because there's a lot of unsexy industries out there. But it doesn't exist in major cities for the most part. It exists where energy and land are cheap, and there's not a ton of innovation, because it's so focused on cost that there's no money to innovate. And so when it comes to I've seen almost every software platform, for example, for food manufacturing, and for the most part, they're printing out directions in Courier new font, and someone's printing them out and giving it to somebody on an assembly line and saying can you do this today? And that's the level that in 2019 is not uncommon. And so I do think that there is a new wave of innovation that's coming on. I think it's still very rare to have companies like Edenworks that innovate from the ground up, actually build new factories. For the most part, I would say food production innovation is, we've taken out the gluten in a snack bar, and now we've got a guy in Indiana that we're contracting to make it for us. And he makes the gluten snack bar too. And so he's not doing anything really different. It's just the product itself that changes. Edenworks is we design factories. That's mostly what most of our effort goes into. That is rare. I do think though that going forward, there's this huge opportunity for companies like Edenworks to do more of that, despite how hard it is, because again, as energy gets cheaper in the United States, we're cheaper than China on energy. I don't think most people realize that, but we can build stuff. Energy is the number one cost going into food manufacturing if it's really highly automated. And so with a bunch of new factories that need to get built in order to provide bigger and better food for Americans, what do those look like? Someone has to figure that out. And that person is not going to stay, 65 years old. There's going to be new blood in that. They're going to think about it differently. And that's, I think, starting to change. I mean, it's a very recent thing where new manufacturing, I think, in food is gaining a foothold, and I just see a world of opportunity for young people to get involved in that and re-envision it.
Have you discovered any kind of new ways to communicate to the older generation that's kind of set in their ways on their diet and sustainability? Have you found any new ways to communicate to them? Because I feel like the younger generation, the more social media generation, is very used to some of this terminology and is kind of used to these lifestyle changes. So how do you approach communicating to an older audience that is a little bit more set in their ways about this stuff?
If I'm being honest, we communicate to them by just being cheaper. Like if you're set in your ways, there's not a whole lot of education that we can do. What we can do is say like, this is cheaper, and by the way, it's healthier and more sustainable. But we're selling lettuce, we're selling fish. There's not a whole lot of levers you can pull, and so we are very sensitive to that, and don't try to put 1,000 different labels on our package. We don't do a whole lot of marketing as a result. But I do think that once you do have someone try something new for the first time, and if they could be old, they could be young, but if they try salad greens that don't die within the first 3 days, they take 3 weeks in the fridge to reach full maturity. I think that changes the game. That opens a door for them to be like, okay, why is this lettuce lasting so long? Why does it taste good after 2 weeks in my fridge? And then they're more open to the conversation. And then they do a lot of self-education. Like, we aren't going to be the ones who define what a new wave of agriculture is for most folks. We can have we do in-store marketing all the time in terms of handing out samples. And if we can just get a couple people a day to taste something, be wowed enough that they take local indoor agriculture seriously, they're going to find a whole lot of information by themselves. And luckily, we are part of a movement that I think does a really good job of explaining the benefits just all over the landscape, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, blogs, you name it.
Awesome.
I was talking to an old family friend recently who is a bit older, someone who is retired, and they did mention that they, in retirement, were trying to completely change their consumer behaviors. They were changing how they did everything from yard work to the types of food they bought, which is really kind of interesting to me, because this is someone, as I was growing up just down the street from this person, I just assumed they were going to operate like this their entire lives. And now that they have the luxury of time and they have the luxury of money and being a bit better off, they were telling me it's very easy for them to try new things. What they were lamenting was the fact that the younger generation, people in their teens, 20s, 30s, might not change behavior, might get set in certain consumer patterns now, and then they have 70 years of that consumer behavior to get stuck in. Whereas this person who is a little bit older, and you're 70 years old, or they might actually be a little over 70, said, they're like, well, if I change my consumer behavior now, I don't know how many, I don't have decades and decades and decades of that choice to make. So it's more powerful for these companies to target the younger audience because they're trying to convert a customer who's going to be having those same consumer patterns for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years.
Yeah, I think that is the mindset. I think in our, like the Edenworks specific products that we sell, a lot of the attention is especially driven towards moms, and in that demographic, just because moms really care about the what goes in their children's bodies, and what we sell, which is super healthy, sustainable food, just resonates a lot with folks thinking about their health of their children. But I mean, I've done dozens of in-store demos, and we get people from who are 60 years old, 70 years old, even older than that, who really dig the product. Like I think it's overhyped how much of a millennial product a lot of this local sustainable agriculture is. I mean, if you are 70 years old, you are thinking about your health, and you might not try a wacky new fruit that you've never seen before, but you will eat more greens if that's something that you like. And so we do target those in terms of in-store demos, and we do talk to those folks all the time. But I agree that I think a lot of the attention gets placed on millennials and I think young parents, just because historically they have led the change.
That makes sense. So I guess to segue into something a little bit different, are there any issues that you have with how certain environmental issues are portrayed in the media? And like, if so, what are those? What are a few of those?
There's a lot. Where to start?
Maybe narrow it down to as pertains to food production. Might be.
This is kind of a rabbit hole we could go down, but let's not.
Where do I begin? Yeah. I mean, even within ag though, it's huge. Like I said, I mean, agriculture, whether it's fertilizer production, whether it's after applying the fertilizer, you get nitrogen runoff. There are huge environmental issues that have been going on for decades and have fed a lot of people. I think that's also overlooked. I mean, we have fed more people in the last 50 years than in the history of humankind, as a direct result of our ability to apply a ton of fertilizer. But it's catching up to us, and we need to change it. I do think that in terms of the environmental issues that I care mostly about, one is water. Agriculture is at least 70% of all fresh water used. We are very lucky in the United States to have water, although places like California, sometimes Utah, know what it's like to not have that. But it's still a far cry from what people are experiencing in China, India, the Middle East, where water is just a daily concern. And we haven't figured out how to farm traditionally, in terms of like, by traditionally I now mean industrially, and not use that much water. And so what we've seen is a lot of farms, like Middle East, for example, they want to be sustainable and self-sufficient when it comes to food. So they grow things like corn, and corn takes a lot of water. And all of a sudden, they are growing a ton of corn, using up all of their water, building new power plants to desalinate the water that they do have, because it's all salty, and use that to grow corn, which is not enough to feed their own people. And so it just creates a whole mess of a network. If you could figure out how to farm with a lot less water, and that's what we do. We farm with 95% less water than traditional agriculture. If you're able to do that, you can put farms in places that they never would have gone before, places that are urban, that don't have a great distribution network. People, I think, forget that it's not for food. It's not just about where you have farms. It's where you have roads. That's where people have food. It's not about where the farm is. It's about where the grocery store is. But let's say you don't have a great network of roads and highways, you do need a farm where people are then. And in places, frankly, all over the world, that is a huge need. And often those are the places that don't have much water as well. And if we can provide farms there that don't use that much water, you will save lives. You will save billions of lives.
So as we kind of get toward the back half of the show here, I do want to ask Johnny, what is next on the radar for Edenworks? It sounds like you're constantly iterating, constantly innovating on this process to make the farm and the farms you design more efficient. But is there anything else in the pipeline that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I think aquaculture is in the pipeline that is really exciting for us. So we mostly grow salad greens right now. And that within indoor farming is the number one crop that just gets grown because it's frankly more profitable to grow salad greens than it is any other vegetable or meat product. That being said, I think aquaculture is the number one protein market in the world. It's bigger than beef. It's bigger than cattle. It's bigger than chicken. And it's the fastest growing. And so it's one of these things that is completely absent from America. We do not grow fish at all. And the fish that we do have is wild caught, mostly off like the Alaskan coast. But then it's shipped to China and it comes back here. It gets shipped to China for processing and comes back to the United States to get consumed a couple of weeks later, frozen on a ship. And so we just don't have fresh fish in the United States. It doesn't exist. And we now are in a place where we can have fish that is locally grown, and Edenworks is working on that. In the United States, we mostly just eat shrimp and salmon, and so that's what we're working on. We are growing shrimp, we are growing salmon. The growth results have been incredible. They're really healthy fish and really healthy shrimp, and they taste incredible. And so it's a bit of a game changer for us. We've been growing fish mostly just for the fertilizer for the greens for the longest time, and we'll continue to do that for the next couple of years. But we are working towards a point where eventually you grow a lot of fish, you grow a lot of shrimp, and you provide Americans with locally grown product that's super healthy and sustainable as well.
Fantastic. And Johnny, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people go? You mentioned the Edenworks Instagram account, but where can people follow along with what you're doing at Edenworks? And on a more personal level, your thoughts, your musings, your writing as well.
So Edenworks has a blog. It's hot fire, where we do talk a lot of the macro issues facing the industry. We do talk a lot about what the technologies underlying our business are. And I think they're pretty fascinating. So it's on Medium. If you just type in Edenworks, you'll see us. And then I myself, I do a lot of the blogging for Edenworks, but also just for myself, when it comes to basically the manufacturing industry of the United States, when it comes to economics and basically how do we pay for a lot of this stuff? What does it mean to have an industrial policy that allows a lot of this change to happen that we need so much? That's what I blog about, and I'm on Medium as well as John Bowman Jr.
Fantastic. Well, Johnny, thanks so much for joining us today. And like Johnny said, follow along the Edenworks blog and John Bowman Jr. on Medium for lots of great stuff about the future of agriculture and even a little bit of manufacturing. Thanks so much, Johnny.
Thank you, guys.